Hello. Welcome to our next essay, that is your essay 530, which talks about audit sampling. This is a comparatively bigger essay compared to your other standards that we have done. And this will be a purely English lecture. If any of you need these notes, so these are freely uploaded in the Telegram channel. Link is in the description. Chalo, so let's start. What is audit sampling? Audit sampling happens when you're not able to test 100% of your transactions or 100% of items in your population. So because of the limitations of audit, you have your time limitation, because of your resource limitation, you are not able to check your whole population. So what do you do in such a case? From the whole population, you will pick out certain samples, you will pick certain transactions, certain disclosures that you will check. So audit sampling is nothing but application of 100% audit procedures to less than 100% of items within a population. 100% of procedures, that is, you will perform for all the samples that you select. You will perform all the procedures, but you will not perform them on the entire population. So 100% of audit procedures to less than 100% of items within a population. Okay, so this is your most important definition. The next comes your stratification. Now, what is stratification? Stratification is when you break the population into smaller groups, where each group has a similar characteristic. That is, it is a process of dividing a population based on similar characteristics. Each such group is called a strata. So each group that you have broken it into, it's called a strata. So all the items within one strata will have similar characteristics. Each stratum is treated as if it were a separate population, and proportionate items are selected from each. That is, each of these will be treated as a separate population and proportionate items are selected from each. That is, now since you will be selecting transactions from every stratum, you will be covering every type of transaction in your sample. Okay, now what is your tolerable misstatement? Tolerable misstatement is application of performance materiality. What is performance materiality? You remember, performance materiality is even less than your planning materiality. So application of performance materiality to a particular sampling procedure. Application of performance materiality to a particular sampling procedure. That is, you are keeping even a lesser materiality. Okay. Then next is tolerable rate of deviation. Tolerable rate of deviation is rate of deviation from prescribed internal control procedures set by the auditor, in respect of which the auditor seeks to obtain an appropriate level of assurance that the rate of deviation set by the auditor is not exceeded by actual rate of deviation. Okay, so there is tolerable rate of deviation means sometimes during an audit, what you set is, boss, if out of 100 transactions I check, if there is just one transaction that does not comply to the normal requirement, that is somewhat off, that is okay, that is a tolerable misstatement. Now anything more than one misstatement will exceed your tolerable rate of deviation. So tolerable rate of deviation, let's read it slowly. Tolerable rate of deviation is rate of deviation from prescribed internal control procedure set by auditor, in respect of which auditor seeks to obtain an appropriate level of assurance. Till here it is all okay. That rate of deviation set by auditor, that is the rate of deviation that the auditor is set, it should not be exceeded by the actual rate of deviation. That is, your actual rate of deviation should not be more than the rate of deviation set by the auditor. Okay, the next is your types of sampling. What are your types of sampling? Basically, there are two types of sampling. Where did my cursor go? Yeah, so there are two types of sampling. One is your statistical sampling approach, and second is your non-statistical sampling approach. What is your statistical sampling approach? Scientific sampling based on use of probability theory rather than auditor's own judgment. That is, in such a case, he uses a software. He will not use his own judgment. He will put in the data in the software. He will put what his risk of material misstatement is, what his tolerable rate of deviation is, and the software will give him that, boss, these are the sample that I think you should check. So it is a scientific sampling based on use of probability theory. Now, what is a non-statistical approach? Non-statistical approach is when the auditor himself selects the sample. He will go through the transaction and he will select this sample, this sample, this sample. So that is based on personal experience and knowledge of auditor. Okay, so there are two types of sampling. One is your statistical, other is your non-statistical. Now, what are the risks involved? So, risks involved in an audit, one is your sampling risk, other is your non-sampling risk. Now, what is sampling risk? Sampling risk happens ki the risk that you will give a different opinion had you put 100% of the audit procedures on the entire population, because in sampling what do? We put 100% of the procedures to less than 100% of the population. So sampling risk is what if you had audited the entire 100% of the population, would you have come with a different opinion than what you have come by testing the samples that you have picked? So let's read. Sampling risk is the risk that the auditor's conclusion based on a sample may be different from the conclusion if the entire population was subjected to the same audit procedure. So this is a risk due to sampling that you are taking. Okay, so now there are, in this is also broken into two parts, that is your test of controls and test of detail. Now test of controls is controls declared more effective than they actually are. That is, these are the two risks that we have inside test of control, that either your controls are actually not effective, but since we have only checked the sample we feel that the controls are effective. And the second possible is controls are declared as less effective than they actually are, since we have only taken, suppose we took 5 samples out of 1000, and out of those 5 samples, two samples were which showed that your internal controls are not effective. So what we have done, 2 out of 5. That means we've said that 40% of our samples are ineffective. So we might pass the control as not effective. We might declare the control as not effective. However, what if those 2 samples were the only samples in the entire population of 2000? Hence, in such a case, control might be declared less effective than they actually are. Okay. Now, what is your test of details? Test of details is when your material misstatements are declared not to exist when in fact it does. That is, your financial statements actually have material misstatement, but you were not able to identify those in the audit of financial statements. So this affects audit effectiveness and is more likely to lead to an inappropriate audit opinion. Okay, and second part is your material misstatement declared to exist when in fact it does not. That is, in your samples you feel that material misstatement exists, but actually it does not. So it affects audit efficiency, and it would lead to additional work to establish that the initial conclusions were incorrect. That is, since you feel that material misstatement exists, so you will have to dig deeper, you will have to perform more additional audit procedures. So in such a case, it would affect your efficiency, because this would take more time, more resources, just to prove that earlier that I thought that material misstatement exists, they actually do not exist. Great. And next is a non-sampling risk. That risk that the auditor reaches an erroneous conclusion, that is a wrong conclusion, for any other reason, that is other than for reasons of sampling. Okay. Then next is, what are your auditor's duties? So your auditor's duties with regards to sample design, size and selection of items is, while designing, he should consider purpose of audit procedure and characteristics of population. He should understand what the population characteristics and why is this audit being performed. That is why this procedure is being performed. The next is, sample size should be sufficient to reduce sampling risk to an acceptably low level. That is, the sample size that you choose, your number of sample items should be appropriate. That is, your quantum should be perfect. Then next is your, with regards to performing audit procedures. So your audit procedure should be appropriate to purpose on each item selected. That is, for whatever reason you have selected that sample, you should put your audit procedures as per the sample you have selected. Second, if the auditor is unable to apply designed audit procedures to selected items, consider that item as a deviation. If you are not able to apply your procedure, then that item will be considered as a deviation. And third is with regards to evaluation of results of audit sampling. So determine whether sampling provided reasonable conclusion about the population. You will have to check whether the sampling that you have done, does it provide a conclusion about the whole population or not. Clear? So this is your auditor's duty. Now what are your sample selection methods? So sample selection method, there are five types of methods. So this key is your RSMHB. Okay, so if you want to remember, you can learn it as Sambar, SMBH and R. So these are your five types of sampling. Okay, so first is your random selection, that is all items within a population stand an equal chance. That is, you just picked randomly, you asked Excel ki boss pick any random 10 out of 100 items. So every item has an equal selection probability. Next is your systematic selection, that is number of sampling units in the population is divided by the sample size to give a sampling interval. What does it say? Number of sampling units, that is this is your total population, is divided by the sample size to give a sampling interval. Suppose there are total 1000 transactions in the population and you said that my sample size will be 10. So what do you do? 1000 divided by 10. What do you get is 100. So that means now there are 10 intervals of 100 each. So you can pick one from each interval. Okay. So this gives you sampling interval. Then next is monetary unit sampling, that is sampling based on the amount, that is based on the money value. So value weighted selection, in which sample size selection and evaluation results in a conclusion in monetary amounts. Then next is your haphazard selection, that is sample selection without following a structured technique. It is not appropriate when using a statistical sampling. Okay, we studied there are two types of sampling, statistical and non-statistical. So this is haphazard selection. Mainly it is used during when auditor uses professional judgment. And your, I'll erase this key. Okay, and next is your block selection, that is it involves selection of blocks of continuous items from within the population. Okay, so this is your five types of audit sampling. The next is your factors affecting sample size, that is on what basis, what will determine as to what should be your sample size. So first is your test of controls and test of details. So test of controls, increase in the extent to which your RAP takes into account relevant controls. So if you feel that your RAP should take more number of controls, you will have to increase your sample size. Okay. If there is increase in tolerable rate of deviation, this is also called TODR. So if there is an increase in tolerable rate of deviation, your sample size will decrease, because you are okay with there be more deviation. So if you are okay with that being more deviation, your sample size can reduce. Okay, so over here there is increase, decrease. Over here it says increase in expected rate of deviation. If you feel that my population has a lot of deviations, if that is your expectation, of course you will also have to increase your sample size. So of the population to be tested, you will also have to increase your sample size. Okay, then next is your test of details, increase in auditors risk of material misstatement assessment. If the risk of material misstatement assessment increases, your sample size also increases. Increase in substantive analytical procedures directed at the same assertion. If your substantive analytical procedures increase, your sample size will decrease. Increase in auditor's desired level of assurance that the tolerable rate of deviation is not exceeded by actual misstatement in the population. So in such a case, since you want to increase your assurance, your desired level of assurance, you will also have to increase your sample size. Then is increase in tolerable misstatement. If you are okay with an increase in tolerable misstatement, then you can reduce your sample size. And last is stratification of population when appropriate. That is, you have been able to stratify the population. You have broken down into similar characteristics. So you will be able to decrease your sample size. Great. And with this, we are done with this essay 530 audit sampling. Next, we will in the next video we will be doing essay 540. That is your auditing about accounting estimates, fair value disclosures. Okay. So like the video, and I'll see you in the next class.